Good morning, ladies. My name is Kim Delport, and I, together with my husband, serve on the Sunningdale PM JoshGen eldership team, and we oversee JoshGen kids. And with me today, I have two incredibly good friends. They are courageous women, and I have the privilege of having them in my life. And I know that they are trophies of God's grace and His mercy. The one is Patti Barnard, who together with her husband Roland are overseeing JoshGen Brackenfell and have been in church leadership for many years. The other one is Josie Raubenheimer, who together with her husband Hans serve on the City Bowl eldership team. Both of these ladies have been through great loss and grief in their lives. And today we wanted to talk about loss and grief. And loss is a universal sense of change. And very often, because many of us are uncomfortable with loss and grief, we don't always know how to approach those of us who are close to us or members of our church who are experiencing loss and grief. And it could be loss and grief in many areas. It could be the loss of a child, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a home, the loss of a job. As I said earlier, it's a universal sense of change. And today, what we would really like to achieve is to equip us as ladies to empathetically come alongside and support members of our congregation and others in their process of grief. And so today, I will be asking these ladies some questions so that as we come out of this time, we are better equipped to actually walk alongside and support those who are going through the process of grief. So James chapter 1 says that we need to count it all joy when we face trials of many kinds, because trials and perseverance through those leads to maturity. I can honestly say that these ladies have persevered through trials, and the fruit of maturity and maturing in Jesus is in their lives. And so what I would like to ask, Patti, if you would give us a very brief summary of what led to the loss of your baby.
So as I previously released a video a few weeks ago on the whole process of the abortion that I went through. When I was 17 years old, I fell pregnant in my matric year, and the decision was made by my parents to go over to London and have an abortion. I was about 13 weeks pregnant at the time.
Thanks, Patti. Patti, I just want to say that you're an incredibly courageous woman, and for you to have shared this testimony has been absolutely amazing. I know that it's touched the hearts of many of the ladies in Joshua Generation Church. And I just want to say, ladies, that it's very important for us, as people begin to share these stories with us, that we refrain from any judgmental thoughts regarding them. But our main thought should always be the grace and the mercy of Jesus extended to our sisters who have made these choices and faced the consequences of those choices. And the truth of the matter is that all of us make choices. The consequences are just different regarding whichever choice we've made. And so Josie and Hans together also made a choice. And so maybe, Josie, you'd like to explain a little bit of the process or in a summary of what happened to you guys.
Okay, great. So I fell pregnant in 2016, and at our 17-week scan, it was revealed that my baby's kidneys did not develop properly. And that leads to a whole lot of things, but basically the doctors suggested that we terminate the pregnancy because our baby had 0 life expectancy. But we will go into the details, but we decided not to do that, and I carried my baby full term and gave birth to her knowing that her birthday will most probably be the day that she died as well. So I gave birth to her, but she only lived for a few hours, and then she basically went straight from Hans's arms to a Heavenly Father's arms. So that's how we lost our baby. Yes.
So both of your experiences regarding the loss of your babies have been different, and we're aware that people grieve in different ways. And it's very true that grieving is a very healthy emotion. We do know that God, our Creator, has given us emotions. And part of our process as Christians is to learn how to lead our emotions and not allow our emotions to lead us. But we do know that grieving is a healthy emotion and that there are different stages of grieving. They could be anger and shock, they could be denial, could be depression, it could be finally accepting. And we also realize that these grieving stages are very fluid. But we experience grief in different ways. And so, Patti, maybe you could just give me an idea of how you initiated your grieving process, or if there was a grieving process around the loss or death of your baby.
So it was difficult at the time because I felt like I didn't have the almost privilege of grieving. The guilt was too overwhelming. So initially, it was just something I dug my head in the sand and didn't think about. And then as I got saved, then the whole thing of guilt and shame was so much more of an emotion for me than the grieving. So I felt like I had a cheek, if that's can say that, to actually grieve because I murdered my baby. So I never allowed myself to grieve. And it was only once I started to go through the process of healing that then I realized the grieving process. So I would say that I only recently, in the last 15 years, allowed myself to go through the grieving process.
Okay, thank you. And Josie, how would you say your process was initiated? Or when was it initiated? Because obviously you had received news earlier on in your pregnancy that you would expect Joha to pass away, as you said earlier, on the day of her birth.
Yeah, so for me I had the opportunity to deal with it from the moment we heard the news. So it was obviously an initial shock. But I just knew, I think I knew from people around me and from being in church that I cannot just swipe these emotions under the carpet. I had to deal with it. So for me, the main thing was just to keep my heart soft. I think I told Hans, if we can get through this with my heart still soft towards him and towards God and towards the church, then we're going to make it. So I think it was from the beginning just to keep my heart soft and to allow myself to grieve from when we heard the news. Yes.
It's amazing. And obviously having been alongside you guys in that process, it was amazing that you brought others into the process with you, because I can probably say that for all of us, our grieving process started then already. Although we were trusting God because we know He is a miracle working God, that He would heal Joha, but we also know that we began to prepare ourselves for the possibility that she would not live. So yeah, that is absolutely amazing. So ladies, I do realize that there are men involved in this process as well. And we do know that men grieve differently and show emotions differently. And Patti, in your case, you and Roland were not married at that time, but you did get married later on. And obviously, Josie, you are married to Hans, and there is a process of grieving that takes place between spouses at that time. And so maybe, Patti, you could give us a bit of insight into how Roland has processed the loss of this baby. It's different circumstances, but how has he processed the loss of the baby? And also very aware that spouses don't necessarily grieve in the same way at the same time. Sometimes one spouse may be in anger whilst the other one is in depression, and vice versa. So maybe, Patti, you could just give us a bit of insight as to how you guys have processed together and how Roland maybe has processed this loss.
So at the time, Roland was very angry. One thing about Roland is he didn't carry the guilt, because he had really tried to approach my parents and had asked them please not to go with the process. I remember at the time he came to the airport and begged my father not to take me. So Roland didn't actually struggle with guilt. But he did struggle with anger. He was very angry towards my parents, and that took a long time for him to get over. So I think at that time, he went through the process where I didn't, but he did. And then once we got married and I started to show symptoms of struggling through this process, he's been extremely supportive and always been there for me, always allowed me to speak openly, never tried to stop me from sharing my heart. He's always encouraged me along the way. So I think he actually grieved right in the very beginning, which I think has been very helpful for him because he hasn't struggled like I have.
Thanks, Patti. Josie, obviously you and Hans were married at that time and you received the news together. How do you feel that he processed this and how did you guys process this together?
Yes, to be honest, I don't think one of us are naturally the best processors or in touch with our emotions, so we were quite intentional about it. So we went together to see Robin Scott, he's a psychiatrist, and he actually just helped us to give almost words to things we were experiencing and feeling that we didn't understand. So I think one obvious thing is the anger for Hans especially, but also he was actually irritated. He had this irritation and small things would irritate him and then he couldn't understand that. And Robin actually helped us to see that was the root was just sadness and hurt and he had to deal with that. And so Robin really helped us. And one thing I remembered that was super helpful is Robin advised us, because we went to see him a few weeks after this happened, and then the event, it was such a build up to her birthday that event was still very raw and open when we went to see him, and he recognized that and he suggested as a couple we should almost ceremonially close that event, not the grieving process but just that event, and that was so helpful. So Hans and I went together, we took a road trip, we took a bit of a holiday, and what we did was scatter Joa's ashes at a special place. I think that was so helpful for both of us as a couple to do this together and to start the grieving process almost together. So it did bring us closer together going through this.
So I think that is so incredibly important that couples communicate well during this process. In my experience, very often when people lose a child particularly, they are inclined to almost miss each other in the process. And the sad statistic is that many people end up divorcing when there particularly is the loss of a child. And so I think it's important that you have sought psychological help in that process and be able to communicate your feelings and emotions through that process. So as I've already mentioned, there are different stages of grief. And these stages, as I said before, are very fluid. And I think as observers and those who come along to support guys who are going through stages of grief, we need to be aware that not everybody is experiencing grief in the same way. And as observers or supporters in this process, we should really endeavor not to impose what we would feel or expect people to be going through in that time. And also to realize that people don't really ever just get over the death of somebody. They actually learn to accept that. And the challenge is that sometimes as anniversaries come around, or birthdays come around, or memorable dates come around, people may experience that grief again in different ways, yes, minimized maybe, but there are some things that arise around certain anniversaries. I spoke to somebody the other day who was saying that around the death or the birthday of their son, they often organize a celebration around that. But the challenge that they have is very often on the day, they don't feel like participating in that celebration. And yet this son has passed away a number of years ago. And so everyone is experiencing grief in different ways. And so Patti and Josie, maybe you could just tell us obviously it's a few years for you, Josie, and a number of years for you, Patti, since your babies have passed. How would you say you experienced the grieving process now around, Patti, in your case, the prospective birth date of your baby, and Josie around the birth date of Jaha?
So for me, I didn't actually calculate my baby's birth date, and I never allowed myself to do that ever. And it was only once I started with post-abortion counselling that I actually worked out the date, which was many years later, many years later. So up until that time, I had almost blanked out the birth date. Obviously, again, the guilt. But then when I started the post-abortion counselling, that was part of my healing process, was to actually calculate the date. And it just so worked out that the date of my first baby would have been the same as my first son, around that same date. So, but it's not something I really... So, I ponder on. It's not something I really allow myself to go to.
Wonderful. Yeah, Josie, you.
Is I think the birthday, there's always, I always have a moment on the day that we would have celebrated a birthday. But for me, sometimes catches me by surprise. It would be a random moment, or I would watch a movie or hear a song, and it would just remind me of her, and it would show me that I still have some hurt and grief that I have to deal with.
Yes.
And I'm actually grateful for those moments, because I think once again it shows me that my heart is still soft. And I think it's like you said, it's not something you can ever really get over.
Yes.
But there's always like an empty seat on the dinner table. You always know there's someone that should have been there that's not. So it definitely, I don't think it's ever really get over it.
Yes. Amazing. And I think, ladies, it's important for us as sisters in Christ, or just even if it's ladies that are unsaved or who haven't experienced Jesus in the same way that we have, for us to be able to empathetically, in other words, put ourselves in the shoes of those who've lost loved ones, and to be able to empathetically come around them in these times. Even as Patti's talking about now, and she has got tearful, and that's perfectly fine. And we shouldn't feel uncomfortable about the fact that she's got tearful about this situation, because essentially she's my sister in Christ, and I love her, and this is part of our bonding together as we walk through tough times together. And it actually brings me into a place of where I'm brought into her world, but not only into her world. I will then use this experience and take it into the world of other ladies and equip myself through her experience to come alongside and support other ladies who've been through similar processes. So Patti, from your testimony, we understand that your abortion had a deep impact on you, both spiritually and emotionally. And maybe you could just explain to us how you began to join the dots between the fruit that was manifesting in your life and your abortion. And then perhaps you could maybe explain to us, because as we have mentioned, Patti established a counselling clinic, a pregnancy crisis counselling clinic in Benoni. And you would have counselled other girls who were either contemplating or had an abortion. And maybe some of them have not joined the dots between some of their erratic emotions and their abortions. And maybe you could say or explain as to whether you think it's possible to walk through an abortion and remain totally unscathed, emotionally or spiritually, by an abortion. Perhaps you can answer that question for us.
So from a spiritual point of view, obviously the impact only hit me once I got saved. Up until that point, spiritually, I was dead. So what really caused a blockage in my relationship with the Lord was the fact that I felt I had committed the unforgivable sin. Even though in my head I knew that I was forgiven, I couldn't experience it in my heart. And it was through a long process of the Lord revealing truth to me that I could get past the point of that actually I am forgiven. So there was a blockage in my relationship with the Lord for many years in that regard, and emotionally the guilt and shame was something that was almost I couldn't live with, and with a lot of girls who have had an abortion, depression comes on them, and they don't actually know why they're depressed, even suicidal, and it's that deep guilt and shame. That guilt and shame is so very deep, that emotion, that I don't believe you can get over it without counseling, without someone walking the road with you, without somebody, even spiritually, just allowing the truth of what God says about the situation to bring freedom. And the part of the question you asked me, do I think somebody can come through an abortion unscathed? I don't think so. I can't believe that somebody can. Many girls that I've spoken to, that I've counseled, it all goes down to the same thing, and it's the guilt and the shame of it. Even though in society now it's much more acceptable than it was 40 years ago, there's still shame and guilt, because we know deep inside of all of us, we know that it's wrong, whether we are Christians or whether we're not. There is that deep inside of you knowing that you've murdered. That is what it is. Abortion is murder, and it's a hard thing to say, but it's the truth. And many girls struggle to actually live with that fact. And I just think that you really need to get help to actually walk that process through. There is definitely a process that needs to happen.
Okay. And Patti, as you look back now, what advice would you give to any young girls who would be contemplating an abortion? I mean, obviously one of the questions that may be asked in your situation is, why did you not stand up to your parents at that stage? Why were you compliant with their decision to fly you overseas to have this abortion? And so as we look at Patti now, counseling the Patti then, what would you say to yourself, and what would you say to other young girls who may be thinking about having an abortion, or who have had abortions and are sitting in a similar situation to what you found yourself in, and that was just overwhelmed with guilt and shame, or maybe not even joining the dots between their depression or anger or denial or their emotional blockages? Because obviously there is a potential for people to build walls that lock out all their emotions. And people who've been through trauma, we're aware that when they suppress emotion, they suppress all emotion. You can't just suppress some of your emotions. And so people go through emotional neutrality, is what I call it. It's almost like an emotional paralysis, often when they've experienced trauma. So perhaps you could give us some insight into what you would say to another young girl, or to the Patti who was 17.
You know, the problem with abortion, it seems to be at the time an immediate fix to a situation. So let's just get rid of the problem. And I've sat with girls who are contemplating an abortion, and I suggested adoption, and their reaction has been, oh no, I could never do that. I could never go through a pregnancy and then give my child away. I would never be able to live with myself. And then my question is, but you would commit murder. That's the reality of it. But at the time, it's just let the problem go away. And for me, at the time, with my parents, they convinced me that they were doing the best thing for me. And I believed that at the time. But yeah, if I was counseling Patti then, I would say, and I recently, in fact, spoke to a young girl who was contemplating an abortion, and I said to her, she said to me she couldn't bring a child into her lifestyle. She lives in a shack, and she just couldn't bring a child into the world. And I just said to her, you know what, for now, you're thinking of that, but to actually murder a child for those reasons, are those really good enough reasons to murder somebody? And that really got her thinking. Sometimes you've got to actually call it for what it is.
Yes.
And, you know, some young girls just want the problem to go away because of the shame of the family that they're bringing onto the family. And I just encourage the girls that it's possibly for a year of your life. And then you go through with your pregnancy, if you choose to adoption, or if you choose to parent, it's probably 2 or 3 years of your life, and then you're free. You've made the good decision. Even for you, Josie, you live in freedom because you made the right decision. That you can, for the rest of your life, you live in freedom. They don't understand that if you make the wrong decision, you live a long time of your life until you find freedom in Jesus.
Yes.
You live with that guilt and shame, that it actually locks you in, and it can be debilitating.
Yeah.
So they've got to actually see that this is just a short bit of your life, and then you live in freedom. But a wrong decision puts you in bondage for many, many, many years, with much counseling, with much support, and yeah, it's just, but you've got to try and let, like the young, had somebody counseled me, maybe I would have made a different decision.
Yes. Yeah.
At the time.
And so, ladies, as Patti has explained, I think we said we wanted to equip, and just from some of the things that she has said, I would like us to have takeaway nuggets from what she said as you listen carefully to some of the suggestions she's made, that we would be able to enter the lives of ladies who are contemplating abortions and begin to speak to young girls or ladies along similar lines, reminding them of the guilt and the shame and the pain that comes with an abortion. And I would like us just to ponder on some of the things she said and put them in our arsenal of weapons that we can use as we come alongside ladies who have experienced or are contemplating a similar thing. So Patti and Josie, both of you have had to employ spiritual processes for your healing, and then also some practical processes for your healing. And maybe you would like to just enlarge on that for us as we come alongside you in this process and learn from what you experience so that we are better equipped. I mean, obviously, I do know that there are different stages, and we have referenced those already. And for us to be intentional with people as they are processing their grief, and to be aware of where people are at, understanding that these processes are fluid and they can come and go. And for some people, grieving might only be a year or 2 or a couple of months. For some people, it may take longer. For some people, it might appear that they're absolutely fine and there's nothing wrong, but actually maybe underneath they are grieving and we don't initially see that. And then also for us to be alert and aware that some people might be unhelpfully stuck in a process of grief. For instance, they might be stuck in depression, and how do we help them come through that depression? We might be aware of the fact that they're not sleeping much or that they have suicidal thoughts, and if they're stuck in that process, I do think we can come alongside and helpfully make suggestions like, gee, you're not sleeping much, don't you think maybe you should get some help for the fact that you're not sleeping, or you seem to be sleeping too much or not taking care of yourself. Is there a reason for that? And maybe we need to look at this together. Maybe you'd like to see somebody and I could come with you or whatever, but perhaps you girls can give us an idea of how you spiritually and practically processed this situation. So maybe Patti, you could give us some idea of how you did it, both spiritually and practically.
I think it's really important for someone who's had an abortion. They definitely need to have counselling. They need to be able to actually talk about it, because abortion is something that is kept in the dark. It's something that you don't talk about. And the burden of that in itself is really hard to bear. So you need to encourage somebody who has had an abortion to speak to somebody. They need to be able to share what they've been through. They need to be able to share every emotion that they've felt. They need to share spiritually. They might also be struggling with, can God forgive this sin? So to encourage somebody to go for counselling if they've had an abortion. I don't believe that you can just do it on your own. I couldn't. And many that I've spoken to have not been able to do it on their own. So that would be to help somebody that has had an abortion, encourage them. If you feel that you cannot counsel them yourself, you don't feel you're experienced, find somebody who is experienced in this area and go with them. As you said, Kimmy, is to say, come, I'll go with you. That's, for me, that would have been really helpful. I had to find my own way. I had to find counselling my own way, but had a friend identified it and said, come, let me take you, could have been very helpful for me. And, bringing things into the light. Anything that's kept in the dark, the enemy will use against us. The guilt, the shame, and everything that goes with it. But once things are brought, there's an amazing experience when you bring things into the light. There's that saying that says, a burden shared is a burden halved. Well, it is true. That is actually very true, because when you bring things out into the light, already the process starts to happen just from that. So trying to encourage somebody to go for counselling, I think spiritually and emotionally is extremely helpful.
Josie, what you say was your spiritual process and some of the practical processes that one would embark on in this process. I think you're not the first lady who has lost a baby in this way, and there are going to be others after you. And obviously, we would love to learn from your process. So, what would you say are some of the spiritual things and processes that you walked through, and then some of the practical things that were very helpful for you to embark on, that would just help you in your grieving process, but also things that could probably inform others and would help them in their grieving processes, or that we were in a situation with you guys when you were having to make this choice and decision, and then advise on some practical things. And I felt that God gave us some insight at that time to some of the practical things for you guys to do. Maybe you can enlarge on what those were and how they've helped you.
I think I'll start with the practical. It was actually one of the things you suggested, Kim, and I did not think of it before her birthday, but you suggested make sure they weigh Joa, make sure you take her footprints and take pictures. And that day was so overwhelming. We did not think about it on the day, but before, because we talked about it before, we could almost decide that that's what we're going to do, and we did that. And I took all of that, and I made a book, and I wrote a story from the beginning, and we had the pictures, and footprints are one of the most special things I have of her. And that book and that story was definitely key to my grieving process, because it was a way of, like I said, not ignoring what happened, but actually leaning into it and looking at it and feeling it. And I think what Patti said, it was so important to do that in community, because all I did was go there with my emotions and feel the loss and grieve, but I relied on everyone around me to tell me, am I doing things as unhealthy, or am I stuck? Because I couldn't see it for myself, but I couldn't almost take on the responsibility of doing this right, because I couldn't. So I just grieved, and I allowed people to enter in that space and tell me if I'm stuck. or unhealthy. And I think that was one of the key things. And spiritually, I think the main thing for me was worship. I just worship.
Absolutely.
And I honestly believe God changed me in that time, because as I was worshiping, he did things and he changed me, and I don't even understand it.
Yes.
And I think I could see his goodness despite of circumstances. I didn't see his goodness naturally around me. Nothing indicated that he was good, because it didn't turn out how I wanted it to turn out. But I could see his goodness supernaturally because I worshipped him. And I think I also saw that he deserves worship. So I almost had the conviction, just worship, he deserves it. And I could see his goodness as I did it. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most profound memories I have of that time, is how you and Hans worshipped through that process. It was absolutely amazing just to see you offer sacrifice, because it really was a sacrifice of worship at that time. So Josie, you and Hans had a very strong and deep conviction that you would not terminate this pregnancy, because you believed deeply that this was not your decision, but this was God's decision. And I know together with you, we all believed that it was possible that God could heal Joha right up until the moment that she breathed her last. I do remember that even after she was born, we were at the hospital and the elders went in to pray for her and pray for her healing. And that was a very profound moment. And right up until that time, we trusted that our Father, who is good, could heal her. And yet that wasn't your reality. And how has that impacted on your theology of healing?
Yes, I think even after she died, we decided beforehand we're going to ask our Father if he could raise her from the dead, because we believed he could even do that.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing I realized we can just ask.
Yes.
And he didn't do it, and I don't know why. And I think that's the big thing that changed for me, is I don't have to know.
Yes.
And I see in part, and he is God.
Absolutely.
And I think my theology shifted from healing, the theology of healing, to I think just the healer.
Yes.
And I can just look to him, and I still believe he can do it.
Yes.
But I don't understand why he sometimes does it and sometimes he doesn't. But so I think to the reality, I think my theology changed, where I do believe God is good and he can, but there will be suffering.
Yes.
And that's the tension, but that's the truth.
Yes.
I think it's in 1 Peter, I love that scripture, it says, don't be surprised if faced by trials, like something strange has happened to you. What you think something strange has happened, there will be trials. And I think I kind of knew it as a Christian, that there's suffering and trials, but I thought God wouldn't let the worst case scenario happen, or maybe something terrible will happen, but you won't really feel the pain as extreme because God is with you. But he never promised that.
Yes.
So I think it also changed my perspective on suffering, that his goodness and suffering can coexist in the same reality. Yes.
And I think one of the things that I've learned from loss and suffering and grieving is that we mustn't allow our experience to determine our expectation of God. Now, we have passed through this with you guys, and I've experienced grief and loss in my own life, but I have determined one thing, that we do serve a good God, and He's sovereign, and whether He chooses to heal or not to heal, He remains a good Father. And we can trust Him because we know that He is in the business of redemption. He redeems circumstances. And we know that through our suffering, and it's hard to think that we need to count it all joy to experience suffering, but through our suffering, we are able to counsel others and comfort others with the counsel and the comfort that we receive from the Holy Spirit through these very challenging and testing times. And yes, obviously, as Christians, the difference for us is that we pass through suffering with a companion and comfort of the Holy Spirit. And that maybe is what separates us from those who don't have that comfort or companionship. But absolutely, we're not exempt from suffering. And, you know, I've also come to realize that God is more interested in our becoming more holy than He is in our happiness. And He would allow circumstances, as much as that would be an affront to many of us, He would allow circumstances that shape us more into the image of Jesus, so that as we pass through our life and into eternity, that as He looks at us, more and more of Jesus is actually formed in us. So Patti, you've obviously had 3 sons since you had your abortion. How have you processed the choice you made then with your children?
So I only spoke to my children about it in 2012. It was just before I was going to open the Life Choices abortion clinic, and I felt that my boys needed to know the story before I opened the clinic. So I sat with them each individually, not with their wives. Seth and Daniel were both married by then. I just sat with my boys, and I must say it was such a wonderful time with my boys. They were so gracious, so loving, so kind. I sat with them. Merlin didn't sit with us. I just felt I needed to be with my boys, and it was actually such a big part of my healing.
Yeah.
The way that they responded, and even recently, like a few weeks ago, when I released the abortion video, I told my boys, you know, this is what I've done, and all of them so gracious. They've just been absolutely amazing, and it's really helped me.
Yeah.
They, especially Dan and Seth, are not ashamed to talk to me about it. They will openly speak about it, which is very helpful for me. And then I asked them to speak to their wives. I didn't want it just to be with them. I wanted their wives included. So they then in turn spoke to their wives, and both Jessie and Sam were very gracious towards me, just responded in such love and made me feel so accepted and encouraged me as being brave, and I didn't feel judgment from my children or their wives at any moment. It was actually such a healing process for me, actually speaking to my children about it. It was actually a wonderful experience.
Because the truth of the matter is actually that was their sibling.
Yes.
That is the truth of the matter. And so it's so important to bring children in on our processes, because essentially while they may never have known that child, there is a level of grieving that maybe they haven't even confronted yet. But it's important for us to take our children along on that journey. So Josie, obviously your little ones are still small, but how do you, or have you already, or do you intend to bring the memory of Johar into the fabric of the life of your family as you just live out your life? How would you say you have begun to do that, or maybe you and Hans intend to do that?
We have already begun doing it. We've got a picture of Joa in our house, and I've got a 2-year-old, and she asked me about the picture, and I tell her, this is Joa, this is your sister, and she's already with Jesus. And I don't think she completely understands that, but I love it. Often she would just point and say Joa, and I just love hearing her name in our house.
Yes.
So that's already part of our family, and I think that is the reality of our story. And even if people ask me, I would say I've got 3 daughters.
Wow.
One is already with Jesus, and at this stage I get to raise 2 of them. So I really want to, that is the truth. I want to keep it part of our story and part of our family.
Wonderful. I think, even as they've expressed these things, I often think of ladies who've had miscarriages as well. And I think it's important for us, even if I know these days, maybe when I was younger, we didn't wait the 12 weeks necessarily to tell people that we were pregnant. But if you have experienced a miscarriage or recently experienced a miscarriage, it's very important to share your grief and your pain around that. And for us as ladies, not to kind of brush miscarriages under the carpet, because it feels to me sometimes we need to celebrate and mourn the life of those little ones who have passed into eternity or in the arms of their Father. And I think we all rejoice one day to know that, Patti, you know that one day you will see that little one. You will see that little one when you pass into eternity. Although, I mean, we talk about eternity, we actually do live in it. It's outside of time. But that you will see, and that we will all see Joha. I mean, I never forget that little face, and it was probably one of the most precious moments to see her and to observe her. It's such a beautiful, beautiful baby. It was a privilege to be there, and just sometimes it was hard to conceptualize that this beautiful little baby had so much going on inside of it, but we couldn't see it on the outside. But it's a memory that has stuck with me, and I think it's an honor for us to almost keep the memories of those little ones alive. And because we, as much as we know that they have passed on, they lived, and if we talk about from conception, they were there and God knew about them. So ladies, I know that people are so well-meaning. None of us want to purposefully injure one another or wound one another with our words or our actions. But sometimes out of ignorance, we do. And so maybe you could just explain to us, Patti, Josie, as we know, and this is Joanita, maybe you call her Josie. We know that sometimes people have done or said things that were unhelpful in the process. And I know that very often when we were going through these processes, people say things which seem to them to be helpful, but are not always helpful, like maybe God has saved you from a life of dealing with a baby who had physical impairments. And, they thought maybe what they were saying was helpful, but maybe it wasn't. So maybe, beginning with you, Josie, maybe, I do remember walking through this process with you at the time and being aware that people were sometimes saying things that were unhelpful, not because they were being malicious, but it just wasn't helpful. And I think to some degree that is what sparked me even then thinking about doing something like this, so that we would actually meaningfully support people who were going through processes of grieving or loss.
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that was difficult was people wanted to almost give a silver lining to the situation. And sometimes there just isn't. It's just a terrible thing, and it's just a loss, and it almost felt like people couldn't handle that.
Yes.
So you would tell them what's happening, and it's so uncomfortable. You just want to almost say something positive.
Yes.
So that was hard to deal with, and I think also people would also try to give you hope. So they would say, one day you'll have a beautiful baby that's healthy. And it's not that I wanted babies in general. It was a specific person, Joa, that I lost. Yes. And I think even with talking about the miscarriage, it's not just a baby, it's a person that God was busy forming in your womb. And that person is precious, and to almost know that, and when you support someone, not to be general about it, it's a person that you're grieving. And I don't think we can give each other that sort of promises, because no one could have promised me that I would have 2 healthy children that I do have now. I could have gone through another complicated pregnancy because we don't have that promise. So I think to be careful not to give hope, that in that situation I knew it was a false hope because I'm going through something that I didn't expect. So just to be careful of that. And I think also, like you said, some remarks can be very insensitive. So at that stage, I would rather have had a child with disabilities than not a child, because it's my child. It's not.
Yes.
It's not even. So just to think about what you say, not being insensitive. So I think that's.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's also people are uncomfortable with the circumstances, so they avoid talking about it altogether, and that could make the person feel as if this uncomfortable situation is not worth talking about, and actually sometimes you do want to talk about it, and so people should actually not avoid talking about it or not avoid asking questions about Johar, because sometimes just talking about it is part of your healing process as well, and gives us insight and empathy into what you've experienced. Patti, what would you say as well?
So for me, what is not helpful is when people try and minimize what I've been through by saying it really wasn't your fault, you weren't in control, it was your parents made the decision. But I was 17. I could have stood against what my parents wanted me to do. I had Roland's full support. I could have. So I needed to take ownership of what I had done. I needed to take responsibility for what I had been involved in. So to try and just pass it on to my parents, I've already gone through that process of forgiving them, of walking through that whole process. So for me, I need people to understand that I need to take responsibility. So to try and minimize it actually makes me feel like, well then, why was I so broken?
Yes.
If it was all their fault and not mine. It actually makes you feel worse, because you feel like, wow, then I'm really broken. Or I was really broken.
Or you overreacted.
Or I overreacted, and it's actually not so bad. Actually, it is bad.
Yes. So
I think that's not helpful. I think people are well-meaning.
yes.
They just want to make you feel better. They, that's people's hearts. They just want to try and make the pain go away. That's our instinct.
Yes.
But that's not helpful. I must say that when abortion is like a no word, so people don't really want to talk about it. So even after I released the last video, people I came into contact with, they didn't actually want to talk to me about it, and in fact I actually needed them to.
Yes.
I didn't need them to say, well done. I just needed them to acknowledge they had done it.
Yes.
But that's just what people are like. So to actually speak, be open.
Yes.
The fact that I've brought it into the light means that you can talk to me about it.
Right.
I'm okay with it.
Yes.
Don't pretend it didn't happen. I think that's a lot of what you struggle with.
And absolutely, I think, Patti, as you were talking now, it occurred to me that if we are prepared to talk to you about it, and we give you the space to talk about it, it actually opens doors for other girls to come into freedom. Absolutely. Because they realize that we're equipped as women to deal with these situations, and as they bring that into the light, we're not going to respond or react rather with horror and shock, but we're able to listen to their stories, to empathize with their stories, to draw it out of them. And as we do that, we're actually encouraging them to bring stuff into the light and to walk in greater freedom. And for me, that's absolutely amazing, because really that's what we're here to do, to walk in greater joy and freedom ourselves despite circumstances, and to lead others into those places. And by being non-judgmental, extending grace and mercy and empathy to ladies who find themselves in these different situations. And so, if there's a takeaway from this, it's we need to talk to each other about these situations. Don't avoid the topics. Sometimes it's you might not even have to say anything. Just be there. Just be there. Listen as much as you can. Ask a question now and again, and then listen as people. And sometimes people need to retell the story a few times, and that is part of their healing process. They need to say it a few times, and they might cry every time they say it, and that's not wrong. It's just part of their process.
Crying doesn't mean that you're not healed.
Yes.
I can still cry.
Yes.
But I still have walked through the process of healing.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that I can't cry now.
Yes, of course.
From the emotion.
So, ladies, as people pass through these processes of grief, how do we come alongside people who are going through these processes in a helpful way? And maybe you could tell us what has been helpful for you in this process of grief and loss. Josie, maybe you could tell us what has been helpful, what was helpful in the process.
I think, like you mentioned, one of the biggest things was just to have that space with people.
Yes.
Where you could share, because I wanted to share some of the details and retell the story over and over,
yes.
even though it's hard. And I think also to be, there were amazing people around me that were very intentional about walking me through the process.
Yes.
So, for example, I remember one good friend that really helped me. I went to visit her, and then I saw on her fridge was a calendar and all my gynae dates, appointments were in that calendar. And because she was so proactive in supporting me, and I realized she was very intentional about it. We're on the flip side where you share some of the details of your story or your journey, and people just forget it, or they ask you the same question again. It's not helpful.
So, ladies, it has been an absolute privilege today to speak to both Patti and Josie about their experiences of loss and grieving. And my trust in this whole situation is that we have a takeaway from this, that we as ladies would come and be meaningful supports to those of our sisters, and some of those who are not yet our sisters, in this process of grieving and loss. And we did listen to some of the unhelpful things that have been done, but there are many ways in which we can be helpful in this process as well. Some of those is just being able to and be prepared to approach the topic and speak about it to those who are grieving. Practical things like looking after children, cleaning houses, doing groceries, but most importantly is to actually be in it for the long haul. Because I think often when things are happening, we engage at that time. But then as time goes by, we incline to forget. And so my encouragement is to be with the ladies in the long haul of some of the challenges that they may be facing regarding their processes of loss and grieving. And then I would like to say that I know that we serve a good Father, and that any form of suffering causes more of Jesus to be formed in us. And I certainly can honestly say that I have seen more of Jesus formed in both Patti and Josie through this process. But my own testimony of this is that more of Jesus was certainly formed in me. And I can honestly say that particularly on the day that Johar died, we were at the hospital, and there was the most amazing presence of the Holy Spirit there that day. It felt like there was an open heaven over that hospital. And it was a profound experience for me to see the impact on both of Josie's doctors, both the gynecologist and the pediatrician, as Johar passed away. And I think for both of these doctors, they had an opportunity to see a different way of doing things. I think for them, they had probably never had a situation where the parents had decided to continue with a pregnancy when they had strongly, and I know Josie almost said that at every consultation, they strongly advised the termination of the pregnancy. And I know that the pediatrician particularly had said, I've seen another way. And there was definitely some form of closure for Hans and Josie on that day. And so my conclusion of this is that we need to embrace suffering. We need to see more of Jesus formed in us through this process, because our sisters' journeys are our journeys too. And we need to be prepared to go on these journeys of loss and suffering. Jesus was prepared to do that. If you think of Lazarus, he was prepared to go on that process of suffering and loss with Mary and Martha. And we know that Jesus went through that process for other reasons as well. But yeah, we need to laugh with those who laugh and mourn with those who mourn, and engage meaningfully, supportively, and empathetically in the process of grief and mourning.